In a rapidly changing world, the global economy is like a giant machine that is no longer operating smoothly, containing countless risks that most people either do not realize or deliberately ignore. In that context, Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, not only warns but also frankly points out the signs that we are living in a period of serious financial instability. He doesn't make baseless predictions. Instead, his warnings are based on a long series of economic fluctuations and the monetary policies governments and central banks are implementing. The story starts with something very simple: the money we use every day. Have you ever wondered what the true value of a piece of paper money is? It is no longer backed by gold, as it once was, but relies solely on trust in the government, in banks, and in a financial system that, he argues, has long ceased to serve the interests of the people. Kiyosaki calls this a great scam and states that we are living in a bubble economy. It's not just a real estate bubble or a stock bubble, but a bubble of confidence. Since the global financial crisis in 2008, governments have used loose monetary policy to save the economy. They print money to pump liquidity and cut interest rates every time the market fluctuates. But do you know what happens when too much money is printed? Money loses value. Inflation increases. Real assets escalate, while the purchasing power of workers declines. Wealth becomes increasingly concentrated within a small group, while the rest are increasingly marginalized. Look at what is happening around the world. Currencies are constantly losing value. Markets are unstable, and public debt is soaring like balloons waiting to burst. In that context, Robert Kiyosaki does not hesitate to say, "We are closer than ever to a great financial crisis." The scary thing is that most people are still living as if nothing is happening. They continue to put money in the bank, continue to believe in paper money, continue to invest following conventional advice: save, work hard, and retire at 65. But times have changed. The safe financial strategies of the 20th century are no longer suitable for the economic earthquakes of the 21st century. Robert has warned not just once. In a series of interviews, articles, and social media appearances, he keeps repeating, the system is crumbling. According to him, the collapse won't come from a sudden big bang, but from hundreds of thousands of small cracks creeping through every hidden corner of the economy. Every time a bank goes bankrupt, every time the government launches a bailout, every time the stock market turns red, it's another warning of what awaits. But why don't people see it? Because the signs are often obscured by colorful headlines, short news reports, and the very weak financial education system we grew up with. We were taught how to make money, but not how to protect our assets. We were advised to trust the system, but not encouraged to question it. That is why Robert Kiyosaki says he is not a prophet, but a narrator of what is obvious yet overlooked. He tells of an economy distorted by misguided monetary policies and a financial system designed not to protect you, but to exploit your ignorance. And if you don't see that, you will be left behind. In short, what Robert wants to emphasize is not just a warning but a wake-up call. The world no longer operates as we once knew it. And financial security is no longer in the hands of large institutions but in the hands of each individual, if they are willing to learn, investigate, and dare to act differently. In the next parts, he will analyze in more depth how central banks are manipulating the system and why Bitcoin, gold, or silver are not just investment tools but perhaps the most important asset protection hedges of our time. But first, let's face reality. We are in a storm. And the question is, where will you find shelter? Before proceeding to the next part, the program team looks forward to receiving your support via the like button to motivate us to bring more meaningful and valuable content. We sincerely thank you for your interest. Right now, please continue exploring the content. Have you ever wondered who really controls the flow of global money? It's not the politicians you see on TV, nor the CEOs of the commercial banks where you open your account. Behind the scenes, a small group of organizations, names most of us have never heard of, hold the power to determine the value of the money in your pocket, the price of everything you consume, and the financial future of an entire generation. Robert Kiyosaki doesn't just talk about it, he exposes it uncompromisingly. At the center of this web of power are the central banks, the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, And, at the very top of the pyramid, is an organization almost no one talks about, the Bank for International Settlements, BIS. Headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, Robert Kiyosaki calls them the most dangerous players because they are not elected by the people, are not accountable to the public, and have the ability to print the money that you and I have to work our whole lives to earn. But the problem isn't just printing money. The problem is they can control the entire global financial system with tools like interest rates, money supply, and bailout policies. They decide when the economy will be boosted and when it will be strangled. And in that game, you are not the player, you are the pawn. Robert Kiyosaki has repeatedly pointed out that central banks do not serve the interests of the people. They exist to protect the system, a system he believes is rotten, full of manipulation and fraud. When the market crashes, they bail out the big banks. When inflation soars, the people suffer. When their money loses value, the elderly, workers, and savers all suffer. But the big financial institutions, the insiders who understand the rules of the game, often lose little. Remember the global financial crisis of 2008. Who got bailed out? The big banks, financial corporations, hedge funds. Who lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost faith in the future? Millions of ordinary people. And when the crisis was over, did you see any central bankers held accountable? No, because they are often considered too big to fail. They are the ones who write the rules. Kiyosaki doesn't just criticize, he explains in detail how this game works. For example, when the Federal Reserve prints trillions of dollars to stimulate the economy, where do you think that money goes? It doesn't go directly into your pocket. It often flows into the financial markets, where stocks soar, the wealth of the rich swells, and your cost of living increases. You see, they are arguably stealing your wealth legally through the devaluation of money. And it's not just in the US. The European Central Bank has kept interest rates near or below zero for years. The Bank of Japan has been buying trillions of yen worth of bonds and stocks. The Bank of England has implemented quantitative easing programs. It's all the same scenario, printing money, pumping it into the financial system, inflating asset prices, and leaving the bill for the next generation. The scariest thing, according to Kiyosaki, is that they might be preparing for a major restructuring, not a reform for the people, but potentially a global redistribution of wealth where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class is slowly wiped out. That is why he sometimes calls this system a financial class war. You can't see it with the naked eye, but if you look closely, you will see clearly. The people who control the money also control the fate of the world. Robert doesn't just tell stories, he draws connections. He shows the link between the decisions of central banks and the daily lives of individuals. When gas prices go up, when food gets expensive, when savings are no longer enough to live on, when you have to work overtime but still save nothing, it often traces back to one thing: money and who controls it. Finally, he poses a question that anyone listening should ask themselves. If central banks have unlimited power to print money, if they are not controlled, not supervised, and not serving your interests, then why do you still place your faith entirely in the money they create? That is when he opens the next chapter, where he talks about owning real assets, things that are beyond the control of the traditional banking system. But before going there, what you need to understand is that this game is not for the naive. And if you don't know who is controlling the game, then you are definitely not positioned to win. The world is changing, and things once considered safe are now shaky. There is no certainty when the value of money can be eroded overnight by decisions you have no say in. Under these circumstances, Robert Kiyosaki, who always goes against the grain of traditional financial thinking, offers clear advice. Get out of the paper money system and invest in tangible assets, things that cannot be printed from a machine: gold, silver, and especially Bitcoin. 3 names, 3 symbols for 3 layers of defense. In an era where financial risks are more unpredictable than ever, Kiyosaki isn't saying this for show. He isn't standing in front of the camera just to get attention. He gives this warning from a specific perspective, that of someone who has witnessed cycles of collapse, lost money, lived through crises, and learned the biggest lesson: real assets are often the last thing standing when everything else collapses. Let's start with gold. For thousands of years, Gold has been considered the ultimate store of value. No currency in human history has held its value longer than gold. When currencies collapsed, when inflation raged, when wars happened, gold still held its value. Why? Because gold cannot be printed. It has to be mined, transported, stored, and it is finite. It is that finiteness that makes gold a hedge against currency devaluation. Silver is similar, although it gets less attention. Kiyosaki believes silver has great growth potential because it is both a store of value and has industrial uses. Most importantly, it is still a physical asset you can hold in your hand. In an age where everything is digital, holding something tangible of value is truly significant. But the asset he seems to have the most expectations for recently is Bitcoin. Why does someone from his generation, like Kiyosaki, believe in a digital asset like Bitcoin? The answer lies in the principles Bitcoin is built on: finite supply, decentralization, and inability to be controlled by any single government or bank. For him, Bitcoin is not just a digital currency, it is a revolution. It is a symbol of financial freedom in the digital age. Bitcoin has a limited supply capped at 21 million units. No one can create more. No central bank can print more Bitcoin. Unlike the US dollar or the euro. That makes it analogous to digital gold in the eyes of many, including Kiyosaki. He once shared that he first heard about Bitcoin around 2017 and, like many people, was initially skeptical. But the more he researched, the more he realized that this might not be just a virtual currency but a real asset class capable of protecting people from financial shocks caused by the traditional banking system. Since then, he has become one of the louder voices in finance advocating for Bitcoin. Why do we potentially need 3 layers of defense: gold, silver, and Bitcoin? Because each asset has its own characteristics. Gold offers traditional stability. Silver provides flexibility and industrial demand. And Bitcoin represents disruption and resistance to centralized financial power. These layers of defense might help you not only preserve the value of your assets but also break free from dependence on a financial system he believes is decaying daily. Kiyosaki warns that anyone who still keeps all their assets in cash or traditional financial assets like stocks and bonds is betting entirely on a system that appears increasingly unbalanced. They are living with a false sense of security. And when the bubble bursts, they could be the first to get hurt. He shares a memorable image. Keeping money in the bank is like keeping water in a leaky bucket. You can pour in as much as you want, but it can still drain away through inflation or bank failures. Keeping gold, silver, or Bitcoin could be like keeping assets in a sealed container. The value relative to fiat currency might fluctuate, but the asset itself doesn't evaporate due to printing. And you don't have to worry as much about bank collapses or policy changes affecting the asset's existence. The story here isn't just about investing, it's about financial survival in uncertain times. Kiyosaki isn't advising you to become an economist. He's advising you not to be naive. Don't believe the system will always be there to protect you. Because history has shown that when things fall apart, it's often the common people who suffer the consequences. Tangible and digitally scarce assets are not just a trend. They are fundamental considerations in a volatile world where value can be rewritten by central banks. The only things you can truly trust, he implies, are those that cannot be easily created or manipulated by humans. And maybe right now is the time to ask yourself if the assets you're holding are real or just numbers on a screen vulnerable to systemic risks. When you were a kid, you were likely taught that if you studied hard, got good grades, went to college, and then got a good job, you'd be successful. That's a familiar formula reintroduced to millions worldwide since childhood. But Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, tells a different story, one that starts with doubt and ends with a hard truth. The traditional education system is not designed to make you rich. Have you ever wondered why we spend 12 to 16 years in school but aren't typically taught how to manage money? Why is there usually no subject about saving, investing, or even how to read a balance sheet? Kiyosaki suggests this isn't an oversight, but intentional, because the current education system was largely built to create employees, not owners. It is designed to teach obedience, following procedures, and obeying orders, not necessarily to encourage questioning salaries, taxes, or taking control of personal finances. Look at the university system. In many developed countries, millions of students graduate with one thing accompanying their degree: huge debt. Student debt not only forces them to delay future financial plans but also makes them hostages of the system. They are often forced to find a job as soon as possible. They may feel they cannot take risks, cannot invest significantly, and cannot easily leave their jobs because they have to pay off the debt. And so the cycle begins: go to work, get paid, spend, pay off debt, and repeat, a financial cycle Kiyosaki famously calls the rat race. He once said that growing up, he had two fathers. One was his biological father. The other was his rich dad, the father of his best friend. His biological father was a highly educated man with degrees, worked for the government, and strongly believed in the value of the traditional education system. His rich dad, on the other hand, was a businessman who never finished college but had a deep understanding of money and assets. From these two influences, Kiyosaki realized the difference wasn't just in years of schooling, but in mindset. The poor dad believed money was primarily a reward for effort and credentials. The rich dad believed money was the result of financial intelligence and strategy. The current education system, according to Kiyosaki, teaches the wrong strategy to an entire generation. You are taught that saving is good, but often not told that savings are being eroded by inflation daily. You might be encouraged to buy a house for stability, but perhaps not shown how a 30-year mortgage could cost you nearly double the home's initial worth and interest. You might be told that investing is risky, but not clearly explained that perhaps the biggest risk is not investing wisely at all. And what is the result? A society potentially filled with people holding degrees but lacking financial literacy, people smart in the classroom but struggling to pay bills. People who work all their lives but still can't make ends meet comfortably in retirement. Robert Kiyosaki doesn't deny the value of education, but he believes education must align with reality and prepare students with skills to survive and thrive in a volatile world, not just fit them into an outdated economic model. He makes it clear: you can be a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, but if you don't know how to manage money, you can still end up financially stressed in an era where money dynamics change faster than curricula. Kiyosaki encourages everyone, especially the young, to re-educate themselves financially. Learn about assets versus liabilities. Understand the difference between active and passive income. And ask questions about taxes, inflation, and public debt. Things that directly affect people's lives but are often absent from general education programs. The solution isn't abandoning education, but learning the right things. Learn how to make money work for you and how to keep it. Learn how to invest and protect your assets from market volatility and policy manipulation. Learn to think like an owner or investor, not just an employee. In conclusion, Kiyosaki delivers a challenging but clear message. If you just follow the path everyone else is taking, you will likely get what the majority gets: debt, worries, and dependence. But if you are brave enough to think differently, learn what schools don't teach, and act differently from the majority, you can create your own financial freedom. And in a world changing daily, that freedom is arguably the most precious thing you can have. In a world where faith in paper money is fading, a new symbol is emerging, one not created by central banks, not backed by governments, not printed by any machine, and not controllable by a group of powerful people sitting in Washington, Frankfurt, or Tokyo. That symbol is Bitcoin, a digital asset Robert Kiyosaki doesn't hesitate to call the people's money. For Kiyosaki, Bitcoin isn't just a new technology or a temporary investment trend. It represents a potential revolution in how we understand and use money. For decades, currency has been a tool of power, controlled by a small group that can manipulate interest rates, money supply, and the economic fate of millions. But then Bitcoin appeared with a simple yet powerful principle: no single entity can control it. And that is what makes it potentially dangerous to the old system. Robert once said something to the effect of, "Bitcoin is the people's money because it doesn't require you to trust anyone, not a bank, not a government, not an intermediary. You are the owner, custodian, and controller." Because of that, Bitcoin has done something potentially revolutionary. It gives financial power back to the individual. But what makes Bitcoin so special? First, its finiteness. Only 21 million Bitcoin units will ever exist. No more can be created or printed. In contrast, dollars, euros, or yen can be created endlessly by central banks with the push of a button. The result of endless printing is often inflation, devaluation, loss of purchasing power, and ultimately, the ones who suffer most are savers, wage earners, and ordinary people. Second is decentralization. Bitcoin operates on a global network with no central coordinator. No single entity can shut it down or unilaterally change the core rules. Every transaction is recorded permanently on a public blockchain ledger where everything is transparent and practically unalterable. It's not just technology, it represents a new kind of trust in a system that cannot be easily manipulated by central authorities. Kiyosaki has warned that every time a central bank pumps newly created money into the economy, they are arguably quietly stealing wealth through inflation. Every time a government issues a $1 trillion bailout, they are potentially redistributing value from savers to borrowers, from ordinary people to connected insiders. In a game like that, Bitcoin represents a potential way out, a financial refuge for those who understand what might really be going on. Many people argue that Bitcoin is too volatile, constantly going up and down. But for Kiyosaki, short-term volatility is just noise. He looks at the bigger picture. Gold was also doubted. Silver was looked down upon. Every truly new asset class goes through fierce debate and volatility before potentially gaining wider acceptance. And Bitcoin, according to him, is currently in a stage where those with foresight are accumulating, while the majority remain skeptical. He isn't saying Bitcoin is risk-free. On the contrary, he clearly understands it is a turbulent market. But he also believes the biggest risk might be continuing to place absolute faith in a traditional system that shows cracks daily, a system that, every time it encounters a crisis, tends to print more money, pushing the problem further into the future while the devaluation of assets silently eats away at the fruits of your labor. Kiyosaki isn't calling on you to throw away all your traditional assets to buy Bitcoin. He isn't advising you to become a blockchain expert overnight. He is just suggesting that you start learning about a potentially new financial world, a world where power might shift from large institutions back to individuals. And if you understand that possibility sooner than others, you might have a better chance of being on the safe side when the next financial storm hits. The financial future no longer revolves solely around working for 40 years and hoping for a decent retirement funded by potentially devaluing currency. That future may belong to those who are proactive, those who not only make money but also understand how to keep and multiply it in real terms. Bitcoin, in his eyes, is a tool, a powerful tool, if you know how to use it properly within a diversified strategy. At the end of his sharing, Robert Kiyosaki leaves a question that sounds simple but is enough to move anyone struggling amid the current economic chaos. Do you want to control your money, or let someone else control it for you? Because in this era, that choice may not only determine how much you earn but, more importantly, how much you can keep. If you have read this far, please comment, "I have read to the end," so we know you are someone who pays attention to detail. We look forward to hearing your perspective on this topic. Do not hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments section. Your suggestions will help us improve and bring more quality content in future videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and see you again in the next video.